December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor burns. The Pacific Fleet lies shattered in the shallow waters of Oahu, columns of black smoke twisting into the Hawaiian sky like funeral pyres. In Tokyo, champagne glasses clink in the Imperial General Headquarters. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto permits himself a rare smile, though his eyes betray no joy. He has awakened a sleeping giant, yes, but for now, the giant stumbles in darkness. Japanese staff officers spread maps across lacquered tables, red circles blooming across the Pacific like blood in water. Guam falls, Wake Island falls, the Philippines teeter, Hong Kong burns. Singapore, the Gibraltar of the East, crumbles in a humiliation that will echo through British history. In 18 weeks, Japan carves out an empire spanning 7 time zones, swallowing islands, coastlines, and resources like a typhoon devouring fishing villages. The rising sun flag climbs poles from Burma to the Gilberts, and in those heady months of victory, Japanese generals believe they have won not just battles, but time itself. Time to fortify, time to dig in, time to create a defensive perimeter so vast, so studded with coral fortresses and island garrisons, that America will exhaust itself in blood and treasure trying to breach it. They call it the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, a fortress of 10,000 islands. And they laugh, actually laugh, when American strategists hint at something they call island hopping. The term itself sounds absurd in Japanese war rooms. Leapfrogging across the Pacific? Bypassing fortified positions? Leaving enemy garrisons to wither on the vine? It defies the samurai code. It defies the logic of total war. It sounds, to Tokyo's finest military minds, like the desperate improvisation of a nation that knows it cannot win a grinding, attrition-based campaign. But on June 30, 1943, in a humid conference room on the 2nd floor of the Joint Chiefs of Staff building in Washington, D.C., a different kind of laughter echoes. It is the quiet, knowing chuckle of Admiral Chester Nimitz as he places his finger on a map. Not at the next fortified island in sequence, not at the obvious target, but at a seemingly insignificant speck of coral 800 miles to the northwest. "Gentlemen," he says, his voice carrying the dry confidence of a poker player holding 4 aces, "we are going to teach the Emperor's generals a lesson in geometry." The war in the Pacific, in those early months of 1942, resembles a grotesque chessboard where Japan holds nearly every piece. They have fortified Rabaul into a fortress that bristles with airfields and harbor defenses. Truk Lagoon becomes the Gibraltar of the Pacific, home to the combined fleet, surrounded by gun emplacements and concrete bunkers. Tarawa, Kwajalein, Eniwetok, Saipan, Tinian, Peleliu, Iwo Jima. Each name represents not just an island, but a layered defensive position, a killing ground prepared with fanatical precision. Japanese engineers, many trained in Germany, apply lessons learned from the Maginot Line and the Atlantic Wall. They bury artillery in reinforced concrete. They create interlocking fields of fire. They lay mines in geometric patterns and string barbed wire across beaches in densities measured in tons per mile. They position machine gun nests in coral caves that cannot be spotted from the air, that can only be silenced by flamethrower or satchel charge, paid for in American blood, yard by yard. The Japanese High Command calculates that each major island will cost the Americans 20,000 casualties. Multiply that across 50 islands, and the math becomes a nightmare that will force Washington to negotiate a conditional peace, leaving Japan master of its conquered territories. It is not an unreasonable calculation. The Americans are 6,000 miles from their nearest major base. Their supply lines stretch across an ocean that swallows fleets. They are fighting Germany simultaneously, splitting their industrial might between 2 theaters. Most importantly, or so Japanese intelligence believes, Americans lack the stomach for protracted warfare. They are soft, the reports say, spoiled by abundance. They will grow war-weary after the first 10,000 dead, the first year of grinding island assaults. This belief is not mere propaganda. It is rooted in observation, in the American isolationism of the 1930s, in the way American newspapers agonize over every casualty list. Japanese generals, many of whom studied at prestigious Western military academies, believe they understand the American psyche. They do not. What the Japanese general staff fails to understand, what they cannot perceive from their Tokyo offices with their carefully translated intelligence reports, is that America fights wars the way it builds cities, not through perfection of craft, but through perfection of system, not through individual excellence, but through industrial redundancy. When Admiral Nimitz places his finger on that map in June 1943, he is not improvising. He is implementing a strategy born from brutal mathematical logic, refined by the hard lessons of Guadalcanal, Tarawa, and the Solomons. The strategy is deceptively simple. Do not attack strength, attack weakness. Do not assault every fortress. Assault the ones that matter, and let the rest die of starvation and irrelevance. Choose islands with airfields that can be expanded. Choose harbors deep enough for fleet anchorages. Choose positions that unhinge entire defensive sectors. And most importantly, move faster than the enemy can react. Admiral William Bull Halsey phrases it more bluntly: bypass and haul ass. Between June 1943 and December 1944, 18 months that will rewrite the geometry of Pacific warfare, American forces will seize, construct, or expand 67 major bases. Not minor outposts, not temporary anchorages. 67 fully operational military installations, complete with airstrips, fuel depots, maintenance facilities, hospitals, and supply warehouses. Each one represents thousands of tons of construction equipment, millions of gallons of fuel, mountains of steel matting for runways, forests of Quonset huts, and the labor of Seabee battalions who work with a speed that seems to violate the laws of physics. The Japanese watch this through reconnaissance aircraft and submarine periscopes, and they do not believe their own reports. February 17, 1944, Truk Lagoon, the impregnable fortress. Japanese sailors wake to the sound not of reveille, but of air raid sirens. Though siren fails to capture the visceral terror of that noise, a wailing that seems to tear the fabric of the tropical dawn. Task Force 58, the largest carrier force ever assembled, sits 40 miles offshore. 9 fleet carriers, 6 light carriers, 1,500 aircraft. For 2 days, American dive bombers and torpedo planes savage the anchorage in a coordinated ballet of destruction that leaves 60 Japanese ships on the bottom and 275 aircraft twisted into smoking wreckage. The Japanese command evacuates Truk within a week. The Gibraltar of the Pacific becomes a memorial reef, its sunken vessels, now home to coral and tropical fish, bypassed, ignored, irrelevant. The garrison of 40,000 troops remains, fully armed, fully supplied, and utterly impotent. They will sit on Truk for the remainder of the war, growing vegetables, maintaining weapons that will never fire another shot in anger, watching American convoys steam past on the horizon like commuters passing abandoned factory. This is the brilliance and the brutality of island hopping. It transforms fortresses into prisons. Tokyo cannot reinforce Truk. American submarines infest the sea lanes. American aircraft dominate the skies. The garrison commander sends increasingly desperate radio messages to Tokyo, begging for orders, for purpose, for some role in the war effort. The replies grow more sparse, more perfunctory, until they stop altogether. By mid-1944, Japanese generals have stopped laughing. The symbol that comes to represent American abundance in this island-hopping campaign is not a weapon or a flag, but something far more prosaic and far more devastating to Japanese morale: the Seabee bulldozer. The United States Naval Construction Battalions, Seabees, arrive on conquered islands sometimes within hours of the last gunshot. They arrive with equipment that Japanese engineers have only seen in industrial catalogs. Caterpillar D8 bulldozers, each weighing 35 tons, capable of moving earth at rates that seem superhuman. Les Tourneaux earth movers that can grade a runway in a week. Prefabricated steel matting, Marston mat, that transforms a coral beach into an operational airstrip in 72 hours. At Emerau Island in March 1944, Seabees construct a 4,000-foot bomber runway in 17 days. At Tinian in July 1944, they build the largest bomber base in the world, 6 parallel runways, each 8,000 feet long, in 90 days. Japanese prisoners of war, pressed into labor details, work alongside Seabees and cannot comprehend what they are witnessing. They watch American construction crews work in shifts, around the clock, under floodlights that turn night into day. They watch supply ships disgorge construction equipment in quantities that suggest the ships themselves must be hollow. They watch concrete being mixed and poured at industrial scales, watch steel matting being laid in interlocking patterns by teams moving with assembly line efficiency. Some prisoners, officers who studied engineering at Kyoto University or Tokyo Imperial, stand at the perimeter of construction sites with the expression of men watching magic tricks they cannot decode. One Japanese colonel, captured at Kwajalein, is recorded in interrogation transcripts saying, "You do not build bases, you manufacture them." The mathematics of island hopping reveals its true genius in the casualty ratios. Japanese generals predicted 20,000 American casualties per major island. The reality proves far more complex. At Karawa in November 1943, before the strategy fully matures, the Americans suffer 3,400 casualties taking a coral atoll barely 3 miles long. It is a bloodbath that generates newspaper headlines and congressional inquiries. But Tarawa teaches brutal lessons. The next operation, Kwajalein in January 1944, costs only 372 American dead. Eniwetok, 339 dead. The Americans are learning, adapting, systematizing. They develop specialized equipment, LVT Amtraks that can crawl over coral reefs, flamethrower tanks, self-propelled artillery that lands with the first wave. They refine naval gunfire support into a science, with fire control teams calling in salvos with GPS-like precision decades before GPS exists. They pioneer close air support, with dive bombers hitting targets meters from American positions, controlled by radio teams embedded with infantry. Most importantly, they choose their battles. Rabaul, with its 100,000 troops and 5 airfields, never receives an American amphibious assault. It is simply encircled, bombarded into submission, and left to starve. The same fate befalls Truk, Wewak, Kavieng, and dozens of smaller garrisons. By late 1944, there are more Japanese troops sitting in bypassed garrisons than actively fighting. They are fed, armed, and completely irrelevant to the war's outcome. Japanese generals in Tokyo stare at maps where entire defensive sectors have become gray zones, neither lost nor held. Simply skipped. It violates every principle of their military training. June 15, 1944, Saipan. The sound that wakes Japanese defenders is not the whistle of shells or the roar of aircraft, but something more ominous. The mechanical growl of hundreds of LVT Amtraks crawling over the reef, their treads grinding coral into powder, their machine guns hammering pillboxes in rhythmic bursts. 800 landing craft hit the beaches in the first wave. By nightfall, 20,000 Marines are ashore. By the third day, American engineers are already surveying sites for B-29 bomber bases. The Japanese commander, Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito, sends a message to Tokyo that reads like a eulogy. "There is no hope for victory. We will die as Gyokusai, shattered jewels, the euphemism for annihilation." But before that annihilation comes, his troops experience something that breaks their understanding of warfare. They watch American supply operations. They watch LST landing ships disgorge tanks, bulldozers, ammunition, food, medical supplies, and mail from home in quantities that suggest America has devoted its entire national economy to this single island. They watch field hospitals being erected with surgical theaters, X-ray machines, and blood plasma stocks. They watch American troops eating hot meals prepared in mobile kitchens, drinking Coca-Cola shipped from bottling plants in California, receiving cigarettes and candy and letters in mail calls that happen with postal regularity despite the ongoing battle. Japanese soldiers, subsisting on rice balls and seaweed, watch this through binoculars and sniper scopes, and something breaks in their understanding of the war. They have been told America is weak, divided, on the verge of industrial collapse. They have been told the American soldier is cowardly, that he relies on machines because he lacks fighting spirit. But the evidence before their eyes tells a different story. America is not on the verge of collapse. America is barely trying. The construction of air bases across the island chain reveals the true nature of American strategic thought. Each captured island becomes not just a base, but a node in a network. Saipan's airfields launch raids on Iwo Jima. Iwo Jima's fields support the Okinawa invasion. Okinawa becomes the staging ground for the planned invasion of Japan. But more than physical logistics, these bases represent something psychological. Japanese reconnaissance flights, the few that survive American fighter screens, photograph the construction and bring back images that circulate among staff officers like forbidden literature. At Tinian, the photographs show bomber runways so long they disappear into the island's horizon. At Guam, they show fuel storage facilities with capacities measured in millions of gallons. At Peleliu, they show supply dumps where ammunition is stacked in pyramids 3 stories high, left uncamouflaged, as if daring Japanese artillery to waste shells on targets that will be replaced within days. One intelligence officer, a graduate of the Japanese Naval Academy who spent 3 years studying at Annapolis, writes in his diary, "We taught them naval strategy. We taught them nothing of this. This is something else. This is not war. This is industry pretending to be war." He dies 3 weeks later when his transport is sunk by the submarine USS Harder. His diary is recovered by American frogmen and eventually deposited in the National Archives, where it remains, water-stained and salt-crusted, a testament to the moment understanding arrived too late. The bypassed garrisons experience a peculiar form of suffering. They are not starving. Most islands can grow sweet potatoes and coconuts, can fish the reefs. They are not under constant bombardment. American forces reserve their ammunition for targets that matter. They simply become ghosts, men living outside history. On Truk, the garrison commander establishes a schedule. Military drills in the morning, gardening in the afternoon, emperor worship at sunset. They maintain their weapons with fanatical care, though the weapons have no targets. They stand watch against invasions that will never come. They listen to Tokyo Rose on salvaged radios, hearing about battles at Iwo Jima and Okinawa, battles in which they play no part. Some garrisons do not learn of Japan's surrender until September 1945, and even then, some refuse to believe it. On Anatan Island, a group of 31 soldiers and sailors hides until 1951, convinced the surrender announcement is American psychological warfare. When they finally emerge, skeletal and half-mad, they ask which island they should report to for the counteroffensive. The American officers who accept their surrender do not laugh. There is nothing funny about men who have been bypassed by history itself. The speed of the American advance begins to outpace Japanese comprehension by late 1944. In October, General Douglas MacArthur returns to the Philippines, landing at light with newsreel cameras capturing his wade through the surf. A staged moment, yes, but one backed by real power. 4 massive invasion fleets converge on the Philippines simultaneously, striking at 7 different landing zones, achieving a coordination that Japanese planners insist should be impossible across such distances. The Battle of Leyte Gulf follows, the largest naval battle in history. And when the smoke clears, the Imperial Japanese Navy has ceased to exist as a fighting force. Aircraft carriers converted to decoys are sunk by American submarines. Battleships, including the super battleship Musashi, are pummeled to scrap by hundreds of American aircraft. The surface fleet, attempting a desperate thrust through San Bernardino Strait, is turned back not by battleships but by destroyer escorts and escort carriers, the tin cans and baby flat tops that were never supposed to fight a fleet engagement. Survivors of the Japanese force report American destroyers making torpedo runs with suicidal courage, laying smoke screens, firing their 5-inch guns at battleships 20 miles distant, buying time for the carriers to escape. It is the opposite of everything Japanese intelligence has said about American fighting spirit. These are not soft men. These are not cowards. These are men fighting with the confidence that comes from knowing the full weight of American industry stands behind them, that every ship lost will be replaced by 3, that every aircraft shot down will be replaced by 10. That confidence is more devastating than any weapon. By the beginning of 1945, the island-hopping campaign has achieved something unprecedented in military history. In 24 months, American forces have advanced 5,000 miles across the Pacific, seized or neutralized every major Japanese strongpoint, and established a logistics network that supports over 3 million personnel in theater. The construction battalions alone, the Seabees and Army engineers, have poured enough concrete to build a highway from New York to Los Angeles twice. They have laid enough steel matting to cover Manhattan. They have dredged harbors, built piers, erected hospitals, fuel farms, ammunition depots, and recreation facilities with a speed that makes pre-war construction projects seem like medieval cathedral building. Japanese officers who survived the war and are interviewed by American historians struggle to articulate what they witnessed. They use phrases like industrial avalanche and mechanical tsunami. One general describes watching American supply convoys through binoculars from Iwo Jima's Mount Suribachi. The ships came in lines to the horizon. They emptied. They left. More came. It never stopped. After 3 days of watching, I understood we were not fighting a military. We were fighting a factory that had decided to produce our defeat. The symbolic power of the bulldozer reaches its apex at Iwo Jima in February 1945. The island is 8 square miles of volcanic rock, honeycombed with 11 miles of tunnels, defended by 21,000 troops who have been given the simple order, kill 10 Americans each before dying. The battle lasts 36 days and costs nearly 7,000 American lives. But on the 3rd day of fighting, while Marines are still dying to capture pillboxes meter by meter, Seabees land with their bulldozers and begin grading the airfield. Japanese defenders, watching from cave positions, see American construction equipment working under mortar fire, see bulldozer operators shot dead and immediately replaced by another operator climbing into the blood-stained seat, see the runway taking shape even as the battle rages. On March 4th, while fighting still consumes the island's northern sector, a damaged B-29 bomber makes an emergency landing on Iwo Jima's half-completed airfield. The 11 crew members climb out of their aircraft, kiss the volcanic sand, and shake hands with Marines who are still carrying fresh ammunition to the front lines. By war's end, 2,400 B-29 bombers will make emergency landings on Iwo Jima, carrying home crews totaling 27,000. Men who would otherwise have drowned in the Pacific. Japanese prisoners are brought to watch the airlift operations in April 1945. They stand in wire enclosures and watch B-29s taking off and landing at intervals measured in minutes. They watch fuel trucks servicing aircraft with assembly line efficiency. They watch damaged bombers being cannibalized for parts, the useful components stripped and installed in other aircraft within hours. One prisoner, a colonel who commanded artillery on Mount Suribachi, watches for 3 hours without speaking. When questioned by an interpreter, he says only, "We were told you were merchants and farmers playing at war. You are not playing." The final accounting of the island-hopping campaign reads like something from industrial logistics rather than military history. 67 major bases constructed or expanded, 463 airfields built or improved, 12 deepwater ports dredged and fortified, 2.3 million tons of supplies moved forward per month by late 1944, a figure that exceeds the entire Japanese merchant marine's carrying capacity. The human cost is significant. American forces suffer over 160,000 casualties in the Pacific theater, but it is a fraction of what traditional island-by-island warfare would have demanded. More telling are the Japanese losses. Not just the 600,000 dead, but the million soldiers stranded on bypassed islands, consuming rice and ammunition that can never be replaced, maintaining fighting positions that will never see combat. By mid-1945, Tokyo cannot supply its own home islands adequately, yet it has hundreds of thousands of troops sitting on atolls and islands that no longer matter, watching American convoys sail past like motorists ignoring a closed business. The psychological impact cannot be quantified. Japanese soldiers who survive the war and return to civilian life speak of the bulldozers more than the bombs. They speak of watching Americans build and understanding for the first time that they were fighting an enemy that viewed warfare as a construction project with a projected completion date. One veteran, interviewed in the 1970s, describes his realization. "We had fighting spirit. We had willingness to die. They had machines that made death irrelevant." How do you defeat an enemy that responds to casualties by building a factory to make more soldiers' replacements? The strategy vindicated itself not through any single battle, but through the cumulative weight of its logic. Japanese generals who mocked island hopping in 1943 are by 1945 either dead or preparing for the defense of the home islands with the certain knowledge that they have already lost. The defensive perimeter that was supposed to exhaust American will has instead been turned inside out, transformed from fortress to archipelago of prisons. The calculations that predicted American war weariness have failed to account for the industrial momentum of a nation that produces more in 1 month than Japan produces in a year. The cultural assumptions about American softness have shattered against the reality of Marines who fight 72 hours without sleep, of Seabees who build under fire, of submariner crews who patrol for 90 days in steel tubes beneath the ocean, of B-29 crews who fly 14-hour missions over the Japanese mainland knowing that a single mechanical failure means death by drowning or capture. These are not soft men. They are simply men backed by a system that produces abundance as naturally as breathing. December 1944. An American intelligence officer interviews a captured Japanese colonel on Leyte. The colonel, educated at Tokyo Imperial University, speaking fluent English, seems less interested in discussing troop dispositions than in asking questions. He wants to know how many ships America has built during the war. When told the number exceeds 5,000, he laughs, not in disbelief, but in recognition of a cosmic joke. "We were told you were building 200, he says. "Our intelligence said American shipyards were reaching capacity. 200 would have been enough to defeat us. But 5,000? He pauses, searching for words. 5,000 is not war. 5,000 is contempt. The intelligence officer includes this exchange in his report, and it circulates through American command with the grim satisfaction of vindication. But there is something else in that laughter, something the colonel understands that the intelligence officer does not. The Japanese strategy was never stupid. It was predicated on a reasonable assessment of American industrial capacity, American will, and American strategic patience. What Japan failed to anticipate was not American strength, but the specific nature of that strength. They expected a nation of merchants. They got a nation of engineers. They expected a military that fought for territory. They got a military that fought for logistics networks. They expected warriors. They got factory managers in uniform. Men who viewed war as a problem to be solved through optimization, who responded to every setback by refining the system, who treated island fortresses not as guttered emerald strongholds but as inconveniences to be routed around. The colonel's laughter is the sound of a man realizing he has been playing chess while his opponent was redesigning the board. The bulldozer as symbol culminates in a photograph taken on Okinawa in July 1945. A Seabee D8 bulldozer sits parked at the edge of a freshly graded runway, its blade lowered, engine silent. Sitting in the operator's seat is a young woman in civilian clothes, a USO performer taking a photograph for folks back home. She is smiling, one hand on the controls, the other waving at the camera. In the background, barely visible, are the burned-out caves where Japanese soldiers died by the thousands 3 months earlier. The photograph encapsulates everything the island-hopping campaign represents. The woman smiles because she is safe, because the battle is over, because American power has transformed this killing ground into a place where entertainment troops can perform for servicemen. The bulldozer sits idle because its work is done. The runways are complete. The war is entering its final phase. The machinery of conquest is shutting down to prepare for the machinery of occupation. And in the background, the caves serve as memorial to an army that fought bravely, died courageously, and lost comprehensively because they misunderstood the nature of the enemy they faced. Japanese generals laughed at island hopping because it seemed to violate the warrior code, seemed cowardly, seemed like the strategy of a nation afraid to face true battle. What they failed to understand was that it was not cowardice, but confidence. The confidence of a nation that knew it could build faster than the enemy could fortify, move faster than the enemy could react, produce faster than the enemy could destroy. August 6, 1945, the B-29 bomber Enola Gay, taking off from Tinian Island's North Field, a runway that did not exist 2 years earlier, built by Seabees on an island captured in 9 days, carries a single bomb toward Hiroshima. 3 days later, another B-29 from the same runway carries a second bomb to Nagasaki. The atomic bombs end the war, but they are merely punctuation on a sentence written by 67 bases, 463 airfields, and the industrial logic of island hopping. Japan surrenders not because of 2 bombs, but because those bombs demonstrate the ultimate conclusion of American strategic thought, the willingness and ability to produce even apocalypse at industrial scale. On September 2, 1945, General MacArthur accepts Japanese surrender aboard the battleship USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. Among the documents he receives is a handwritten letter from a Japanese general staff officer, intended for private delivery to Nimitz. It is never delivered, but decades later it surfaces in the MacArthur archives. The letter, written in careful English, contains only 3 sentences. "You taught us nothing at Annapolis about this kind of war. You did not fight for honor or territory. You fought for efficiency, and we had no defense against it." The Pacific theater of World War II is remembered for its iconic moments: the flag raising on Iwo Jima, the kamikaze attacks, the atomic bombs. But the true story of the Pacific War is told in the less photogenic reality of bases built and islands bypassed. It is a story of bulldozers as much as battleships, of construction equipment as much as combat troops, of logistics networks as much as landing craft. When Japanese generals laughed at island hopping in 1943, they were laughing at what they thought was American naivety, the belief that a war could be won without fighting for every inch of territory. By 1945, the laughter had dissolved, stopped, replaced by the hollow silence of defeat. Not because American soldiers were braver. Japanese troops fought with a courage that bordered on the fanatic. Not because American weapons were superior. Japanese aircraft and naval vessels often matched American equivalents. But because the Americans had transformed warfare itself, had turned it from a contest of wills into a competition of systems, and in that competition there was only ever going to be one winner. 67 bases in 18 months. each one a statement, each one a verdict. By the time Japanese command recognized the true nature of island hopping, recognized that it was not a strategy but an industrial process with inevitable outcomes, the war was already over. It would simply take 2 more years and hundreds of thousands of deaths for the formality of surrender to catch up with the reality of defeat. The bulldozers had spoken. The factories had rendered their judgment. And in the calculus of total war, abundance proved more devastating than any weapon ever forged.